Hello, and welcome to Ethically Speaking, a UCF interdisciplinary series on contemporary moral issues. My name is Steve Kubler, and I'm the organizer of this series, and I'm professor of chemistry and optics and founding associate director of the Center for Ethics at the University of Central Florida. In today's event, Dr. Blake Harith will push our thinking to the limit by asking, what if we could use AI and a person's data legacy to create functional bots of long dead individuals? Who would we resurrect? And what are the ethical implications? To focus the discussion, Dr. Harith will specifically consider using AI to resurrect the dangerous minds of military strategists. Now, before we introduce Dr. Harith, I'd like to say a few words about our speaker series and how you can participate.
Hello, welcome to Ethically Speaking, a UCF interdisciplinary series on contemporary moral issues. My name is Steve Kubler, and I'm the organizer of this series, and I'm professor of chemistry and optics and founding associate director of the Center for Ethics at the University of Central Florida. In today's event, Dr. Marc Cheong is going to join us all the way from Melbourne University, Australia, to tell us how AI is changing the hunt for a job and what ethical issues are arising in the workplace. But before I introduce Dr. Cheong, I'll say a little bit about our speaker series and how you can participate. Ethically Speaking is organized by the UCF Center for Ethics with my collaborator, Dr. Jonathan Beaver, who is Associate Professor of Ethics and Digital Culture and founding director of the Center for Ethics. We developed Ethically Speaking to promote conversations about challenging issues of our time, and we encourage you to visit the center's website at ethicscenter.research.ucf.edu to learn more about our activities and to find out about other speakers in our series. We'd also like to hear your feedback and your ideas for future talks in Ethically Speaking. Ethics connects to every facet of our professional and personal lives, and the importance of ethics at UCF, I hope, is clear from the long list of inaugural partners who helped launch this series. All of us in the partnership hope you enjoy the discussions in Ethically Speaking, and we hope it cultivates understanding of how ethics provides frameworks for making better decisions, particularly when there are competing values. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker. Dr. Marc Cheong is with the School of Computing and Information Systems at the University of Melbourne. He conducts highly interdisciplinary work situated at the intersection of information systems, data science, ethics, and philosophy of teaching. Dr. Cheong completed his PhD in social media analysis in 2013 at Monash University in Victoria, Australia. His doctoral work focused on large-scale data analytics, pattern recognition, and how behavioral inferences could be drawn using Twitter metadata. And that work made him one of the early pioneers in using social media platforms like Twitter for research. Dr. Cheong continued his career at Monash as a research associate and later a lecturer. And in 2020, he joined the University of Melbourne as a digital ethicist, where he rose to his current rank of senior lecturer. And at Melbourne, he is also senior fellow at the Burnett Institute. And in July of this year, he was appointed to associate director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Ethics. Dr. Cheong is frequently invited to comment on topics related to digital ethics in the media, social networking platforms, and more recently, generative AI. And he's appeared in a wide range of outlets, including Australia's ABC Radio and the New York Times. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Marc Cheong with us today. Please join me in welcoming him to Ethically Speaking. And now I will stop share and turn it over to you, Dr. Cheong.
Thanks very much, Steve, and thanks, Jonathan, and thanks to everyone for having me today. A good evening. I understand it is the 22nd, so I'll try to do internal time zone conversions in my head and just try to say good evening instead of good morning. It's morning over here. All right, what I'll do is I'll start sharing if technology works, fingers crossed. Yep, hopefully everyone can see the slides, all right? Yep, perfect. Right, thank you. So, thanks everyone again for having me today. My talk today is on, it has a catchy title, but it really reflects a current side of modern tech that is a subject of inquiry for applied ethics we have nowadays. And it concerns all of us because when all of us are looking for jobs, there's bound to be some form of automation or artificial intelligence or whatever we call it nowadays. There must be a piece of software in the hiring pipeline that, for example, gets our CVs shortlisted for a human recruitment panel. Or in the worst case scenario, probably the AI would do most of the shortlisting for us. Is this an issue? As we'll find out soon, spoiler alert, it is kind of a contemporary issue. And towards the end, I have some open research questions that all of us as a community of practitioners and applied ethicists would be talking about. What should the software be? Should we even be using these pieces of software in the first place? So I'll start first of all by thanking everyone who is featured in the set of slides today. This is a joint contribution to knowledge as an academia, so thanks so much to all my colleagues listed there in alphabetical order. Without my colleagues, there would not be work I can showcase in these slides. And as I mentioned before, this is an amalgamation of several pieces of work we've done on the issue of ethics, bias, and fairness in these automated systems for human resource shortlisting and tracking, and basically every major aspect of the recruitment pipeline if someone's applying for a job. Okay, so AI for hiring and automation in general. Again, think back to the days before AI was a buzzword. Again, AI has been going through lots of peaks and troughs recently in the past few decades. At first, there'll be fancy AI, which turns out to be just decision rules. Then there's fuzzy logic. Then there's no AI for a bit in the proverbial AI winters. Then you have advancements in things like graphics cards used to play video games. And lo and behold, these graphics cards turned out to be really, really good at solving a certain class of algorithm or problem, which turns out to be deep neural networks. And then everyone's interested in AI. And recently in the news, the past couple of years, you have generative AI. First, you have GPT or ChatGPT. Now you have Gemini. After Gemini, you have Claude. You have different brands of products. You have their APIs. And suddenly, AI is everywhere. So this is just a trip down memory lane for the past few years. So first we would have seen things like this in the media, or if you're looking for buying software for your company, or let's say you are in charge of human resourcing in organization, you might be approached to, hey, let's check out all the new AI offerings and platforms. And this is according to the Zapier blog. So Zapier is a software company dealing with automation, and this is what they've mentioned. This article is only a few months old. There's AI recruiting software options, and it's not just about organizing, let's say, candidate records or potential employee CVs. It's about video interviews now. It's about chat bots. It's about automation of the whole process. It's about headhunting for top talent and so forth. It's everywhere. Now, to make things even more interesting, this is probably something we can do from time to time. Just go into Google or search engine of your choice and type in GPT hiring tools. When I first started typing in the related search term for a talk last year on the after effects of GPT in various aspects of society, these results keep changing. Now, I know most of these are like long lists, or some of them might even be clickbait, but some of them actually demonstrate the promise of using ChatGPT in a recruiter's workflow, for example. And basically, the point is it's everywhere. Soon, maybe in the next few years, you might see your usual recruitment software having these extra add-ons with generative technology. And watch this space, it keeps changing. But what is really important is this is a bit ironic. So since 2012, everyone knows what ChatGPT is about. Everyone's probably used ChatGPT, and some of us might have even paid money to try out the premium subscription to see what the hype is about. So all these stats, you might have seen these in the media. So from 2020, 2022, end of 2022, suddenly within the first few months you have 1 billion visitors, you have 1 million active users in 5 days. I'm sure most of us have seen all these stats right behind me. But if you're a researcher doing work in, for example, I remember this fancy new technology called GPT-2 or GPT-3 when I was looking for tools that can help me condense my reading list into a few manageable pages. Back then, if I were to do a search on things like software to summarize research papers in concise notes or note-taking software, years ago, it would just be, software that would just take maybe key sentences from a research paper, does so without nuance, does so without actually reading the text. So that was as recent as 2020, 2021, 2022. Back then, I heard of this new technology, GPT. That might be promising. It might be useful to help me generate notes from my reading list or provide concise summaries or TLDRs, too long did not reads. But back then, to get access to this tool, I've had to go through an application process, and I think I haven't even been approved to use the tool, which is now since obsolete. Back then, OpenAI had all these checkpoints in place, all these processes, because this language tool, or the future GPT, was once deemed to be, I quote, too dangerous to make public. But now, everyone knows what ChatGPT is. It's basically anyone who has a web browser. I think for a time you don't even have to log in. You can even go and use it as a guest user. GPT is in, and GPT and other large language models are in the hands of pretty much everyone. This would probably change this talk if I were to present this talk again in 2025. This would probably change everything rapidly. As I said, watch this space. We're seeing things like generative technologies in old tech, such as, Photoshop. We might see more and more generative AI appearing in your usual HR, talent recruitment, or CV shortlisting, or any other piece of software used in the recruitment lifecycle. Now, apologies for sounding a bit pessimistic, but the issues we know of so far. So this is one of the funny memes shared. It's been recycled a few times. It's probably used in various disciplines at universities, but one that's close to my heart would be computer science because I was trained as a computer scientist. So you have on the top left panel, first there's a crack in the wall, statistics. Add a frame to it, machine learning. Well, now if you stand in front of a crowd and just present it as a work in a museum, it's AI. We've been through many of these cycles in the realm of computing science and stats and AI before various generations of AI. If you were to pick up a textbook now and look at as the quintessential AI textbook, Russell and Norvig, AI back then, as early as 2000s, would not be as fancy as the AI we have nowadays. So, again, this is just an in-joke in computing. AI is just glorified machine learning, which is then glorified statistics. The reason I'm showing this slide is, what happens if we just go back to the AI, in scare quotes, of the past decade, couple of decades ago, before GPT, before any new tech? So on the right is a news article by Jeffrey Destin from 2018 of Reuters. Basically, this big tech giant that most of us would have heard of, Amazon, tried an experiment where they used AI to automatically read candidate records and shortlist them, maybe in the hopes of getting high quality talent recruited without biases, without human intervention. Spoiler alert, it did not work. They actually had to shut down the project because it was biased against women. Now, if we were to go back to the previous slide, again, the heart of ML is just statistics. What happens in a nutshell is, well, if Amazon hired mostly men or male identifying candidates, and the machine would pick up subtle cues or signals in these CVs or applications which favor men. So over time, this pipeline would just go, okay, these signals are there in previous candidates. Previous candidates are mostly men, male identifying. Therefore, the next candidate which shows these features would more likely be shortlisted. Again, it's a fact of stats. Now, the interesting thing is, I dug a bit deeper into this news article and basically the follow-up stories. What happens is, this tool can't even be repaired or fixed or retrained. They actually had to stop use of the tool or just limit it to just testing and routine admin tasks. That's as the last I heard of it as of last year. But with a big tech company, surely you'll be thinking, if they can just get rid of any bias in the system, surely they can make it a better product, right? So this brings me to the image on the left. This is a report also in 2020, just a couple of years after the Amazon recruitment issue broke out in the news. That's from my former PhD student, now Dr. Sheila Nyoto. Her research paper is on, I quote the title, Gendered Bots, Bias in the Use of Artificial Intelligence in Recruitment. Basically, she's done a thorough review and some studies from sociology to find out what's wrong with these so-called AI recruiting or AI shortlisting tools. And again, the conclusions are pretty much back to the previous slide. Statistics in real life are biased. Machines that are built on these statistics will obviously be biased because it picks some historical patterns, and therefore, if left unchecked, they can be detrimental if they're deployed. So what happens next is we tried to, from what Sheila has prepared on the left, this was during COVID, and in collaboration with colleagues from both computer science and sociology, and also an industry partner, we set out to see, hang on, can we just replicate this whole thing from first principles, from the ground up? So if we got real world CVs anonymized by an industry partner, if we get the actual key selection criteria document or job posts, can we get some experts in recruitment to sit down as a panel, shortlist people as they're presented on those anonymized CVs by comparing it with the job description? And more interestingly, after that's done, can we have a PhD student who is a data scientist, to sit in with the group, learn from their discussions, learn from their deliberations, and set up the simplest statistical package that attempts to replicate human judgment. Nothing too fancy. Again, open source packages, simple techniques like regression, where all of us pretty much know what regression is. None of this fancy GPT stuff. And let's have our data scientists be involved in the decision-making process to find out what's going on in this simple shortlisting tool. He's required to check in with the sociologists to see how they think, and let's see how biased the system could be, this prototype system could be. So, can we attempt to replicate human judgment, which is again done with real HR professionals in the room sitting in the panel? But first and foremost, I like to echo some of my colleagues in the field, like Aileen Kaluskan and Wei Guo, that current research is based on binarized categorizations when evaluating gender bias. It's important that we move beyond these binaries and also consider intersectional factors as well in future research. Now, the results, first of all, this is just for the human panel. Again, we're taking a human panel of HR professionals and evaluating these CVs. Turns out that unconscious bias actually is a factor in human decision making. But if you were to use the human judgment and amplify it, by amplifying it, I mean just telling the machine, hey, these are how humans have judged these CVs. In future, just work along the same lines because we know our human panel is quite unbiased. They have deliberated on the CVs. They have disciplined knowledge. Let's just replicate that. Nothing fancy, no deep neural networks, nothing, just replicate human judgment. The problem is algorithmic bias is known to entrench societal bias in models. What we found out, even in the human rankings, is, again, these are anonymized as much as possible based on standard sociology research methods. We found out that assuming rank 1 is the best, the higher the rank, the better it is. In positions such as data analyst, where it's in the field of software, as we know, as we discussed before, more men are in software. We found out that women's CVs have an average rank of 5.26 compared to men's CVs with 3.69. That's the average rank. Now, for finance officer, again, the same biases emerge. For recruitment officer, same biases emerge, but in the other direction. This just goes to show that even if we ignore the machine, we don't talk about the machine for 1 second, we just talk about how humans would do things, there might be the potential for unconscious bias. And this is similar findings have been found in sociology, similar findings have been found in psychology, and in the news, this is not recent news, but in some research studies some years ago, we find that in the arts, for example, when auditions are conducted, even from the sound of footsteps, the panel who is judging the performance could identify subtle cues as to the identity of the person, and that will also introduce unconscious bias. So, okay, back to the discussion at hand. We have not even started to unpack the issues with, for example, how large language models are biased or how complex neural networks can be biased. We're just starting with basic statistical methods when applied on human judgment in an attempt to automate these decisions. So again, similar findings from the paper. We found out that this graph is quite interesting. It basically shows a relevant experience in weighted months on the x-axis, and on the y-axis the distribution. It basically just shows from the collection of CVs we have processed, if we were to use some automation, what features would it pick up in terms of relevant experience between our men candidates and our women candidates. Basically, the synopsis is in the second paragraph there. Men candidates from our CV sample, which is the solid line, have a clear shift to the right, which is a higher match score compared to women candidates, which are visualized as a dashed line. Again, these are small issues in the data itself, but then again, we backtrack a bit. It's the result of deliberation from a human panel. If even with a human panel, without tech being involved, we would identify small patterns of bias, any attempt to replicate any of these in the machine in silico would obviously propagate these biases if left unchecked. And these would shed light onto what Amazon was going through with their own recruitment software in the experiment I've shown earlier on. Now, what if we went back to first principles? I was having a chat with Steve and Jonathan earlier, our hosts for this event. What if we just went back to a time before AI? If we did everything manually, would that be slightly better? Well, at least now for starters, if we had a human panel without automation dealing with potential ranking of candidate CVs or shortlisting, let's keep everything in a transparent process where there's a panel, there are rules in play, they're all HR professionals, and just ignore the machine. Problem is, we've gone too far to be able to go back to that that mode of operation, so to speak, because for a given job, assuming that no automations involved, we can have an applicant pool the size of that. Assuming it's 5 minutes per CV, that's a visualization of roughly 100 over CVs. 5 minutes per CV, that's 500 minutes. Converted into hours, that would be roughly 10 person hours. If you have a panel of 5 people, that would be days. Well, the genie's out of the bottle. We can't do everything manually. There's some form of automation. And in fact, even without AI in shortlisting and reading CVs, we still use programs such as applicant tracking systems or ATSs. Basically, it's a piece of software or platform for recruiters to manage the whole life cycle of recruitment, so to speak, from people uploading their documents to a decision being made to a contract being offered in most cases, right? So we can't go back to first principles. This is again one of the funny comics or memes from the realm of technology, which basically reflects the technologist mindset. I can say this because I was trained as a computer scientist. So on the left, you have these sequence of images, basically shows how different roles in the tech space have different attitudes towards a particular project. So the bottom right is actually what the customer really needed, which is a swing with an old tire. But for us techies, we'll complicate things further and introduce bugs and unintended consequences. And if you pay attention to the image just above the one with the tire, how the consultant described it is described as this amazing piece of technology with basically a one-seater sofa or couch just hung from a tree. That's how technology has this way of distorting expectations. So again, think back to the various branches, offshoots of technology from large language models. It would promise you the moon, it would promise you this, it would promise you that. And on the right is a comic from XKCD. It's just one panel. Should your project use a blockchain? The answer is no, you don't have to do so. But what does that have to do with AI in recruitment technologies? Well, if you've seen before, can we go back to first principles? No. Can we keep things simple? Maybe. But what if we just use things like simple statistics? Again, ignore the hype, ignore the fancy blockchains, ignore large language models, ignore any piece of fancy tech. Let's go back to basics. We can use simple stats to speed things up a bit. Again, no LLMs, no hallucinations, no so-called black box effects where everything's just in a system that's controlled by a third party. It's just too complex technically for us to understand what's going on. Okay, so this is a quick example I cobbled together. Let's say you have a job description, escape room manager needed. I like escape rooms. I like solving puzzles with friends. So let's just use this as an example. An escape room is basically an adventure where you and your friends get locked in the room for roughly an hour. You solve various puzzles, logic puzzles, lateral thinking puzzles, and escape from the room. So it's a social experience. What we really need for an escape room manager would be things like good people skills, good team building skills, responsible service of alcohol, creativity, and just basically people skills, just helping people out, hey, has your team considered looking at that side of the room for some locks that would help you escape or some keys that would help you escape? So that's what we're looking for. But on the left, this is a completely fictitious CV. It's about a fictitious person who has done work as an assistant hotel manager and who has done a bachelor's degree in hospitality management. Now, to the machine, if you go back to first principles, it would say, okay, escape room. Nowhere in this CV that says escape room probably does not fit. It will probably just do this if we just use really simple stats. Of course, you would go, hang on a minute. The machine doesn't really understand what an escape room is. You have to help it understand our conception of language. At least a basic language model is required. Nothing too fancy. So this is funny example from Civilization or Free Civ, the strategy game. Everything depends on everything else to work, as in the funny example over there. If you want electricity, you have to start with magnetism. Again, it's a fictitious example of a technology tree. Well, in software development and computing, yes, some technologies have to be built on prior technologies. Even things like large language models would not be possible without deep neural networks, for instance. Now, obviously, we have to start somewhere, and this is one of the simplest ways of teaching the machine language. Read a bunch of books, find out statistical correlations between words. Again, this is used in a different method in large language models, but the simplest one would just be if you read from a corpus of a collection of blog posts, if you find the terms escape room, associate that with hospitality. That's what we can probably do in the example in the couple of slides ago. Apologies. But as we have found, this is a screenshot on the right. What we have found is because our use of language is not perfect, it is biased, it is gendered. And this is a piece of work from, I think, students from the University of Maryland. What they have found is certain words in the English language are highly gendered and correlate to different genders. And basically, the lesson from this slide is if we were to start from scratch somewhere and use the simplest of language libraries, nothing too fancy, even those would pick up biases from society. And that's bad if left unchecked, especially with the advancement of technology. Everyone just goes, hey, let's use tech we have already used before. Let's build them up, connect some software packages and libraries, and just make a new shiny product, which goes back to, again, this joke about, yep, let's repurpose existing technology, make it look really fancy, a really comfortable chair, really shiny, add some blockchains everywhere. Turns out, even if we try to avoid that mindset and use existing open documented pieces of software or libraries, lo and behold, we have issues. So we have seen two options: go back to basics, ignore all tech. We can't really do that because the amount of applicants for a job can be unmanageable. Okay, what if we use simpler forms of stats? As we have seen before in the previous slide, even existing small models of language would have these human biases baked in. Okay, so we can't really go back to the way things were before automation, and now everyone wants automation. Now, the problem with existing tools, I'll just elaborate on this a bit more. Sorry, just a content warning there. It's really discriminatory content on this slide. My apologies. But this was taken from a research paper which shows the biases within text-to-image generation systems. So basically the cousins of ChatGPT, which are pieces of software like DALL-E, for example, and other technologies which visualize a text prompt rather than giving you text in return. And again, if you were, based on the results of this study, if you had to give it descriptors such as attractive person, emotional person, exotic person, and so forth, these systems would show, again, it would just reflect the biases we have in society. And yep, if we were to go back to the example of someone building a new system without realizing that these are the inherent faults of existing systems, then the end product would have unintended consequences, which could be bad. And in this case, it is quite bad, as you can see from the visualization above. Myself and my colleagues have also done similar work on the early version of DALL-E. So one of the early ones which are open would be DALL-E Mini. DALL-E Mini is now called Crayon. It's not as advanced as current versions of DALL-E. So what we have done is there's a group of about 10 of us who are anthropologists, philosophers, computer scientists, techies, sociologists, you name it. We just generated a whole list of images related to certain occupations. We know the base rates of people with these occupations based on the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. But if we were to feed them all into DALL-E and get our team to start coding them, would it reflect the true demographics of the actual labor market according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics? Again, unfortunately, the answer is no. As you can see from the image over there in figure 1, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there's a bit more nuance to the distribution of, say, women or females per occupation. But if you were to look at DALL-E, it's just a binarized view. It's all or nothing, which is quite disheartening. Again, this is just to illustrate the point where if we have Silicon Valley or tech bros in general just building more and more pieces of technology based on existing state of the art, there are flaws. And this, if we were to use these, in something as mission critical as hiring people, of course, these biases would be baked in, and down the track, we would have negative repercussions, especially since many of the up and coming hiring systems or talent management systems or software of that category claim to be able to assess candidates' eligibility by, for example, by means of a video call or imagery. This goes way beyond just reading CVs. It's supposed to read your personality, have again a virtual AI person, which is mainly again large language models, probably neural networks, probably evaluate how someone is presenting over a video call, for instance. So, for example, I would probably fail that test because apologies, I have a slight medical issue. That's why I sound a bit funny. But yep, basically these pieces of software don't account for all the human nuances that we have. And again, as we have shown from the underlying issues with existing simple language models, large language models, image generation models, they're everywhere. And these are things to consider before we can even deploy any piece of new tech, especially in hiring. Okay, so this is a continuation of the previous slide. The previous slide was about the distribution of women per occupation. Now this is the ratio of white people per occupation, again based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and DALL-E being the image generation system we talked about earlier. And again, DALL-E has a myopic view of the world. As you can see, it's clearly biased. Again, there's no nuance. Whereas in the real world, based on labor stats, there is nuance. There are different distributions of people from different ethnic groups in occupations. But for DALL-E, again, you might argue that DALL-E Mini is an early version. We have fixed all that. But then again, if you were to look at news reports of, again, racism, sexism, discrimination are in the news based on outputs of these large language models and generative technologies. Now, this is another side of bias in generative AI technologies that are not in perhaps as much discussion in the media, for example, in academic circles. This is a slide I prepared for a talk I've presented in Papua New Guinea to showcase to them, hey, these are the dangers of generative AI tech. So what I've done is this is a version of ChatGPT as recent as somewhere in 2023, so last year. If you give ChatGPT a prompt whereby, hey, ChatGPT, can you shortlist 3 people from this list? Again, they're all fictitious. So Anna Jones in this example is based in the school in Papua New Guinea. John Jonas based in the school in Melbourne, Australia. And Rob Timms is in Eton College in the UK. And to no surprise, if you were to read through the evaluation of ChatGPT, it might have hallucinated some of this. I'll showcase the next slide, which would again be unsurprising. Considering the factors above, which I quote, Rob Timms appears to be the most suitable candidate for the role of graduate junior business analyst. As a recap on the left, Rob Timms is the person from Eton College. They're all fictitious. Now, I'll read the next line, I'll quote the next line, which is quite scary and quite sad, actually. His strong academic record, prestigious educational background, relevant skills, and potential global perspective make him a compelling choice for this position, unquote. From this snapshot, ChatGPT is exhibiting the same bias. For example, Rob Timms is more qualified because he's from Eton College. Therefore, Anna Jones, who has skills in Salesforce, for example, a software suite required for business analysis, is overlooked. Whereas Rob Timms has the characteristic terms such as Eton College, leadership, robotics, again, these high-tech buzzwords that ChatGPT goes, maybe Rob's the best. And yep, his university standardized entrance score, again, a hypothetical, is the highest. But again, if you look at Anna Jones's skill set, then obviously Anna would also be qualified in this. Again, OpenAI would probably patch these issues as soon as they find out with each iteration of its language model. But hey, then again, these are the issues that we're not looking at when we're talking about implementing AI tech in the hiring game. So, discussion, where to? And this brings me to the 40-minute mark. As I promised our organizers, I'll just have a 40-minute discussion and open the 20 minutes for further discussion, especially around questions such as what can we do in the whole thing, to I'm a techie, I'm a technologist, what can I do to stop this from deteriorating even more? So, to recap what we've just covered in 40 minutes, AI being used in hiring is not necessarily a good thing. But when AI is used in hiring, plus techno-solutionism, plus everything shiny has to be included in our new tech pipeline to make our products even better, that makes things worse. And going back to first principles is near impossible because we have at least systems that would make recruitment easier for us. And going back to square one means we have to manually sift through hundreds of CVs per position, which is, of course, nowadays takes up lots of time and it's near impractical. And in the second part of the slides, again, my apologies for being a bit pessimistic, but current AI technologies are not immune to discrimination, racism, sexism, and so forth. And current AI technologies do not augur well when brought across the digital divide, because if we're just selling AI as a product or as a service or something that can help us, we need to remember that not all of us globally can access these pieces of technology. So I'll open up for discussion soon, but things we can probably chat about would be, what can we do as engineers? For example, if we're just building the tools, what can we do? If we're adopters of technology, what should we do? Should we use tech in everything? Should we AI all of the things? What's the role of ethics education? How can we train the next generation of engineers to think about these things before it's too late? And what are the roles of science communicators? How can we tell the general public about these pitfalls in AI without being too alarmist or pessimistic? So I think with that, that's the end of my talk. And yep, thanks again to our organizers.
Mark, thank you. That was great. We've got a series of questions that have come in while you were talking, and I'll try to curate those really quickly. Dr. Kubler mentioned, everybody, if you've got questions, you can, at this point, you're welcome to raise your hand if you want to ask those, and I will invite those of you who've put questions in the chat to ask them too. I thought we might start with Sharon's question. Sharon had a question for you. Sharon Tucker had a question for you about whether or not, or to what extent, I guess, we can remove the bias that might be in these machines. Sharon, if you're here, if you want to unmute and ask your question, please feel free.
Sure. So I'm a mental health researcher and clinician, and, I get really discouraged because in my practices, all my career, there's so much subconscious bias in most people's experiences, right? And subconscious. And it takes a lot of human awareness to recognize what triggers you have and how you react, right? So that's common and long-standing problem. So I worry, or I wonder, because it seems like we could and we should be able to that these AI systems, and I really appreciate that what you spoke about in terms of the complexity is not going to make it prettier. The sexier machine is not going to make it better for sexier systems. But like you said, I mean, we got to be able to use some of these systems to filter through the early steps. Otherwise, we have too much human burden. I just wonder, how can we do that in a way that can eliminate some of this, just, some of this basic bias like racism, sexism, etc.
Yeah. Thanks, Sharon. That's an excellent question. So, how I will look at this would be from the perspective of my colleagues who are sociologists, actually, because we had this in the paper, one of the papers I've showcased in the slides. The answer is not more techies, but actually the requirement for things like auditing, and basically when something's being deployed, actually having domain experts. So, for example, in the hiring case, HR professionals. Let's say in the mental health space, we have mental health professionals and not techies. The techies can be there to observe, but what we really need are domain experts to go, okay, this is the trial run. Does this seem all right to you? If it doesn't seem all right, do we discontinue it or do we keep on using it? And basically, this is not just a once-off. After a predefined interval, we have to start thinking about these things before we deploy it. Let's say maybe once a month or once every year. We have to do an audit to just make sure that the results coming out of the system are actually free of bias or not harmful, because the nature of the beast is even things like ChatGPT, again, the simplest example because everyone knows ChatGPT by now. Stuff you feed in, it's constantly learning. So there are options you can use in the system to say, do not train on the stuff I type in. But if we don't know about those options, again, in general, just by way of illustration, these things learn, and the inputs you give it today would be the outputs it has few days, weeks, years, months down the line in its knowledge banks. So again, to avoid the whole feedback loop where what we feed to the system gets trained in it, again, using ChatGPT as an oversimplification, if we were to commit to, for example, once every month, whatever we deploy, we test those systems, we manually audit those systems and make sure it's doing the right thing and know when to pull the plug.
That's
so I
great.
think that's one of
Yeah, that's great. And I would just echo that. It sounds like you're saying we do need a hybrid, and we need to continue to evolve this, right? To maybe gradually we do remove some of those biases so we don't have so much. Thank you so much. Great talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. Dr. Kissel, you had a related question. I wonder if you wanted to follow up with your question on bias.
Yeah, so I guess my question was is it possible that we could actually alter or like affect the, maybe just weight it, so we see there's a bias in the real human panels towards men, maybe we weight the thing to select in a better way. And I mean, I have concern that of course the human panel at the makes final decision would just fix that bias again back towards men, but yeah, there's some hope there.
Thanks, Joshua. That's a good question. So, I think in the general sense, work on debiasing these models are still being actively looked into in, let's say, computing, the techies. But what happens is, in the attempt to remove the bias, some other factors we do not know of. So, for example, proxies, right? So, in removing, let's say, protected attributes from being considered by the model, however, the system might still pick up on other secondary signals, which are proxies to the first signal that we then have to take care of. So actually, my current PhD student, Aidan, so one of the authors in the pieces I've showcased, he's currently looking at things like emerging proxies, where, for example, in a complex neural network, which is comprised of so many different variables, we can go, aha, that's where it encodes for things like gender and race. Let's remove that because it's really biased. But then again, other variables, the way neural networks work is it's a combination of the outputs of many neurons, same as a human brain. Again, if we fail to recognize some other variable contributing to the output, which contributes to, for example, the biases in gender or race or other biases in the system, we're getting back to square one. we have to remove these other proxies which contribute to this first order variable, which is then biased. So for a large system, that's a bit tricky. So what is actually interesting is to what extent are large systems, again using ChatGPT is an easy example, being retrained to remove these biases, or is it just easier putting something at the output stage where it goes, if output harmful, then output something like, as a large language model, I can't allow you to do that. So there is a way, I take a point at the end to go, all right, we'll correct for this, but would it be better in the long run to just rebuild your models? And the answer to the latter question is tough, because imagine what it takes to rebuild everything from scratch without bias.
Thank you for that. I'll have some follow-ups maybe after we get through the existing questions, but thanks.
Mark, your answer to Josh's question made me think about something you said midway through your talk. You said that technology has a way of distorting expectations. I wondered if you could just speak a little bit more on that, because there's a couple of things that you've cued me into. One, there's been a lot of hype about the possible implications, positive and negative, for a tool like ChatGPT, but there are also human limiting factors, some of which you've talked about tonight. So can you just expand a little bit on the idea of distorting expectations?
Yep. Thanks, Jonathan. That's also a really good question, and it comes up quite frequently as well. So again, let's say before this, to use the example I had in the slides, before it became ChatGPT and was released to the public, GPT was only known to maybe a small community of researchers, academics, software developers, and so on and so forth. But once it gets released into the public arena, then everyone just goes, it can do this, it can do that, and that raises the issue of us ascribing some kind of intelligence to it, us ascribing some sort of capability to it where it's not designed for. So again, if you've seen in the media things like reports where people go, okay, ChatGPT is now able to exhibit consciousness, or ChatGPT is a good let's say grief counseling bot, so on and so forth. That's not what its original purpose is. In fact, the original incarnations of GPT were meant to be prompted from a command line, not a easily available chatbot that you can summon up on your phone. So again, how these pieces of software, again, I'm just speaking from a more generalized sense, are being marketed to the public, or in the case of, again, HR systems, hiring systems, applicant tracking systems, the way that that's being advertised to, let's say, HR professionals will have an impact of how these tools are used and perceived. So does that answer your question, or does that sidetrack it even further into
No, I think it's a helpful sidetrack. I mean, I think it's a complicated technology and a complicated question. So, well, that's great. I've sort of tried to break questions, Mark, between questions about bias, which we've had some of. And I want to turn now to some questions that we'll just generally put in a bucket of human interactions. But the first of those came from Steve Kubler, Dr. Kubler, who had a really interesting question about companies, students' use or recognition of this technology as potential employees.
as potential?
Thanks. So, I was thinking we maybe expect employees to give as much disclosure as they can about a position. That way we can intelligently apply. We also tell our students to think about where they want to work. And to some extent, we say, do your values align with those of the company? And so I kind of wonder if maybe companies have an ethical duty to disclose if they're using AI in their hiring process. Maybe we can't know everything that happens in the hiring process, but if we have certain value characterizations about how well AI can or cannot be used, might we want to know whether AI has been used in the hiring process so that we could decide, well, I don't want to work there, or I do want to work there.
That's a for example, in around 2018, I think roughly from memory, before 2018, there was mainly maybe just a handful of small websites that go, hey, hang on, before you proceed, we're using this technology, not really technology, it's been there for like decades, called cookies. We store some personally identifying token on your machine. But overnight in 2018, that's due to the GDPR, a ton of these websites have these cookie pop-ups that say, hey, we're using cookies. Do you want to use cookies? We just have to let you know we're using cookies anyway. And that is all enabled thanks to, again, changes in legislation. So GDPR, for instance. And also what goes in the spirit of that legislation is making sure the end user has a choice. So again, I think that is a really good idea, for example, for a company to just go, you know what? We're trying to do the right thing. But then again, with all the tech out there, chances are part of this software suite we're using has AI anyway. So probably it's ethically right for them to disclose. Please note that AI might be used in the management of your application, but we'll try our best not to use the other more fancy things in the hiring process, for example. Even if it's just a quick statement along those lines to reassure future candidates, also sets an example for other companies to follow. It might also feed in back with legislation that goes, okay, there's a clear need to showcase when something has the potential effects or interactions with AI, or things like would AI be used to do, for example, simple sorting, but nothing further than that, just for peace of mind. But again, I draw parallels with the cookie example because before that, no one knew what cookies were, how they were used in Facebook, etc. Suddenly, with the whole change of legislation and awareness, everyone knows what a cookie is nowadays. Even the cookies have been there for like the past couple decades, 3 decades, 3 or more decades, actually.
Thank you for that.
Mark, we've got a question from Dr. Biazzo, Ian Biazzo, who says he can't unmute, so I'll ask his question on his behalf. Dr. Biazzo asks if he would love some opinions on ethics education. At the search committee stage, he writes, it would be too late, maybe, given faculty, staff, recruiters often click through ethics trainings to get them done. Should AI ethics training or ethics in general be implemented in K-12, college, or graduate school, postgraduate education?
Yep.
What's the place of AI in ethics education?
Yep, that's an excellent question. My answer to that is, if possible, in the perfect world, all of the above. Because again, ethics education, let's say, just take for example in terms of secondary school. So let's say the K-12 system in the US. Things like AI ethics link with other forms of ethics when using computing technology. So things like social media ethics or the broad banner of digital ethics in general. I think, for example, because say teenagers have access to social media sites, obviously there needs to be social media ethics. What it's capable of, what are its harms, how do you balance the positives and the negatives? And also what's interesting is Meta nowadays, if any of us have WhatsApp or Facebook or any of the Meta products, there's generative AI built in as a potential correspondent in your contacts list. Now, these pieces of tech go hand in hand, and obviously at Silicon Valley, who knows what's coming up next. So I do recognize the point that in, let's say, the K-12 schooling system, some basic ethics education on how to use tech the right way, what happens when things go wrong, how do you make a stand and stop negative use of technologies, that has to be there. So if we move further to, let's say, university level, again, these discussions we have with fellow practitioners almost every year, the IEEE Ethics Conference series. How do we teach engineers to think ethically? Can you empower engineers so that when they graduate, can they actually speak up against things they see would be things that are not on, things that are a bit dodgy looking? Can they speak up? Can they confidently speak up? And more importantly, can they communicate why that's ethically sketchy and what they can do as technologists to improve it, to fix it, or to just check out that thing which is ethically wrong in the process of building software? So, yep, I think I fully agree with you. Ethics education is really important at different levels of education, but those are just two examples I can think of relating to a contemporary use of digital technologies. Not just maybe not just AI ethics, but also just the broad banner of digital ethics, the use of tech besides AI as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Cheong. There's maybe a follow-on from me, because now I'm thinking, you know, we often, I'm one of these scholars as well, helping engineers think ethically. We hear that sort of phrase a lot, but there's also a sense, I think, that we have to help the public think engineeringly about technologies like this. There's some sort of like procedural knowledge, at least at some level, that everybody has to know. They have to understand the basics of how a technology like this works, so that they can then understand all the ethical issues, bias among others. Does that resonate with you?
Yep, definitely. And that goes to the need for science communication. All of us academic scholars, we need to also be able to translate what issues we're trying to highlight amongst our peers, for example, in a way that's easily accessible to the general public. So by again, one simple example is the general public would go, yep, the algorithm does this, the algorithm does that. I'm just thinking, well, the algorithm's just a fancy name for complex collection of rules. And at the heart of this is that, well, the machines learn from this, an oversimplification, past observations, and if the past observations are toxic, then obviously the outputs are toxic. And if you feed into this by producing more toxic content online, and that the algorithm would obviously pick up on that and produce that as an output in future. So in a way, going back to the point where science communication in general is really important for scholars to be able to just convey this to the general public.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad I'm not alone in thinking about that reflexivity between ethics and science. Yeah. One other question for me, one of the key ethical issues you brought up, and I think you said in your slides, it's under addressed, are the questions of the digital divide. And that got me thinking about a conversation I had with a staff member here at the university a few months ago, who was very enthusiastic that soon everybody would have available to them a very cheap like Alexa equivalent, that would fit in a hard drive in their home, and they could train it on their own data. It would be their own personal assistant AI. Is there a sense in which generative AI technologies face the same problems of the digital divide we've seen everywhere else, or is there something different going on?
To answer your question, I think it suffers from the same issues with the digital divide. So just to put in context, apologies. So digital divide is not just about does someone have access to a computer or does someone have access to the internet. It's also about various things such as, even if, okay, someone has access to it, okay, and someone has to sign up using their, let's say, their email address, giving up their privacy, but it's okay. Let's say move all those things aside. The question is then, can someone use large language models of generative AI effectively as someone else who probably has more access to these technologies, is able to pay for the premium features, is able to use that on their state-of-the-art Android or iPhones, versus someone who can just maybe use a library computer every once in a while, once a week. Again, that's a multifaceted way of looking at things, because now it's not just about does someone have access to it. True, in this hypothetical example, someone has access to it, but it's from a public library computer. It's still access, but it's once a week. And it's the free version of GPT, which is maybe a few generations before the state of the art that you get when you pay $25 to $30 to OpenAI per month. So those things are to be considered. And again, apologies for the pessimism, but this is from a study we have in Melbourne actually during COVID, and myself as part of another research group, whereby we looked at the digital divide in terms of things like remote learning. You might think that, okay, everyone has access to mobile phones, to tablets and laptops, that the digital divide is mostly gone. But from the results of the study which I was part of, again, if you think of the use of tech to do work, to study during the pandemic where social distancing measures were in place, then we quickly find out that for example, in public housing communities, many family members often have to share a single device. Whereas it's not the same in, for example, more affluent areas where someone might have multiple digital devices at once. So that goes to show, again, if you apply that to things like ChatGPT, again, my hypothetical example, difference between someone who has maybe a couple of hours per week sitting at the public library on a shared desktop versus someone who can afford $30 per month, $25 to $30 to open AI and has it on their phone, and they can try and mix and match between OpenAI's offering and Google's offering and so forth. The difference is quite clear.
Mark, is it also still the case that that if you don't want your data shared with, say, GPT, you have to go through the API version, which means you have to pay?
Yep, you have to go to the API version, or even there are several options in the settings which are buried deep within the settings of the free version. You have to find out in order to A, stop training on existing chats you have, and B, stop it for future use.
Yeah, so there's even like subtle digital divide questions built in there,
Yep.
like knowing where those
Yep.
settings are or having the capacity to pay. Yeah,
Yep.
that's super interesting. Yeah.
And the irony is, I only knew how to use all those settings thanks to my colleague who is working in cybersecurity.
Yep. That sounds right. Yep. So intellectual access too. That's great. Thank you. Dr. Kissel, I'll turn it to you for a question on AI and its possibilities for reflecting bias.
Yeah, so thank you. So I guess this is the classic question of like, to what degree is the tool, in this case AI, the problem, versus like place or context it's used, so like the racist society or whatever, right? So I have concerns about AI, like far future, maybe they'll destroy us. But I'm wondering here, like, it's a little unclear, like how much worse than society's average is the bias that we're seeing in AI? I see for DALI, which seems like a pretty unnuanced one, where it seems to force these binaries. But I imagine, you know, the tech people who are hopefully here listening, they could just fix that and you get a more nuanced reply that's more average or probabilistic or something. But I guess the bigger question is like, how much of this problem do you see as a problem of AI as a tool that somehow makes society's biases worse versus just like reflecting those biases? And I want to put my cards on the table that the thought is like, well, if it's just reflecting society's biases, then maybe the sort of reply or response we want to have to this problem might be different. And so like trying to fix AI when AI's problems are just the problems of racism or sexism or whatever, you know, might be suboptimal or something. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. So
Thanks.
in a way, for example, if you go back to the let's say back to first principles, back to building the AI, it has to learn from somewhere, and learning it across the internet, of course, it's going to pick up the bias from society that is encoded within the various blog posts or social media posts or whatever we have to train the system. But after AI is developed and marketed as a product or offering, then basically it just exacerbates the problem. So the term I like to use is entrenchment of bias. So again, people use these AI systems, and again, it acts as a mirror to reflect societal bias, but it also makes things worse. Because let's say, for argument's sake, we all know this already. On social media, you have a polarized view of the world because obviously the more attention, the more inflammatory content one gets, the more attention's paid. The more attention's paid, the better it is for advertising, for example, right? And that is not just holding up a mirror to reflect societal bias, which we have seen in the first step, but can also exacerbate it as well. So it's really a multi-layered issue. The AI is reflective of and also the cause for further bias.
Dr. Kubler, I'd like to turn it over to you for a last question.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Beaver. So one of the things I love about teaching students is they teach me. And in chatting with students about the new challenges of looking for a job, and that AI might be the first hoop you have to get through in order to get your resume before eyeballs. Some students have told me the trick, which you maybe heard, is that you make your resume, say in Microsoft Word, so it looks nice and pretty with black and white text for the real person, but then you take all the keywords you think you need to get through the AI hoop, including the description of the position itself, and you put that in the margins in white text. So it's there in code that the AI sees, but if it makes it through that hoop and it gets to the human, it just looks like a normal resume. So I think that's fascinating. It sounds like an arms race now between AI for hiring and what students and creative humans, all right, which is students, what they'll come up with when they're going the job hunt. But is that practice ethical? Why or why not?
That is a really good question. So, yep, if on the one hand, if we don't use those techniques, our resume may never be picked up. But if we use those techniques, it would form kind of a mini arms race that the companies would patch it. We have to find other ways of doing it. That's an excellent question, which I don't have the answer to. But I'm basically just thinking on the one hand, it's about helping them get an advantage in an already unfair playing field. On the other hand, should we play into the rules of these this mini AI arms race between tech creators and the users of the tech? Do we want to feed into it even more, or just go, no, I'm just gonna submit this CV the good old-fashioned way. If it doesn't get through that, then yep, at least I've tried not to feed into whatever arms race between job seekers, companies, these big tech firms producing the AI. And sometimes there might actually be a third way out. So again, philosophy, not the law of the excluded middle. Even things like for example, that would set us apart without resorting into doing again metadata processing that the machines can't see those terms, is something like just send an email thanking the recruiter or just a firm handshake at the end of the meeting. Those things are potential alternatives. But going back to the main question, it's an interesting one I don't have an answer to. On one hand, I can see both perspectives, but which one's the clearer one? Jury is still out.
Yeah, it seems like a potential misrepresentation, right? And that, you know, how would you as a interviewer feel if it
Yep.
made it through the AI and then you loaded it as pure text and then could see all that extra stuff? Would you feel like you'd been hoodwinked as the prospective employer by the candidate? So I think maybe students, I've also similarly talked to students about using ChatGPT to generate letters of introduction. And it's a weird thing because sometimes foreign students might lean into that and feel like that's an advantage they need, but maybe it misrepresents them. And then I've heard the counter argument. I'm not anyone who thinks non-native speakers of English using ChatGPT to craft their letter of introduction and would hold that against them, or not being sensitive to you know, the intercultural barrier. So I think there's different examples of how we might use tech, be it ChatGPT or AI, to gain advantage, and it might be perceived as unfair advantage depending upon the individual's values.
Yep, but also, if there's any consolation, AI could not replace a firm handshake and a thank you call to the recruiter saying, "Yep, hi, thanks very much, Professor Kubler. It's nice to see you. Thanks for your time for the interview and so forth." AI can't replicate that yet.
Like that. Right.
Well, in that case, Dr. Cheong, thank you so much for your time. It's been a lovely conversation. I give you a firm handshake, but we're across the world from one another. I'll turn things back over to Steve. Thanks, Mark. This was great.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Cheong, for helping us understand how AI is changing the workplace. I'd also like to thank Dr. Beaver for moderating our discussion, and of course, thank our participants for great questions and engagement. A recording of this presentation will be made available on the UCF Center for Ethics website, so you can view it again and share it with others. And there you can also find links to past talks and information on upcoming presentations in Ethically Speaking. So now I'll try to work with the tech and share screen to tell you a little bit about our next event. If I can get it to work, right? Share screen. It's not wanting to cooperate. All I'm getting is pause recording stuff. There we go.
The bit we can edit out later.
There we go. Yeah, good. We can edit things, right? So can you see my screen? Dr. Beaver, can you see the shared screen?
We can, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good, great. Okay, so I'm really excited to tell you about this upcoming talk. I hope you'll join us. And here's the theme. You know, an end-of-life directive can help a person express how they want to be cared for in their final days, and it can also bring peace to families of a loved one. But it turns out some clinicians will not follow a directive if a patient has subsequently undergone a significant life change. That could be something like conversion to another faith. Dr. M. Walsh has studied the life change of dementia and argues that this situation is unique, and the medical community needs to rethink how they respond to end-of-life directives for patients who are undergoing dementia. Dr. M. Walsh is a new assistant professor of philosophy at the University of Central Florida, and so we look forward to welcoming her to UCF and to Ethically Speaking when she shares her thinking and leads discussion at our next event. I hope you'll join us and visit the UCF Center for Ethics webpage now so you can register for Dr. Walsh's talk and find out some of her thinking, and also share your questions so we can have some really interesting discussion about this topic. So I'll remind you, Ethically Speaking is made possible with support from the National Science Foundation and the many UCF partners that you see listed here. I'd like to thank them all for helping bring this series to you. And lastly, once again, thank you for your participation. And I really hope we'll see you at our next presentation in Ethically Speaking.